I'm getting the house and the business. She just gets the dolls." Sebastian's voice echoed through the lawyer's office with such smug satisfaction that I wanted to throw something at his perfectly styled head. The entire family erupted in laughter, as if my inheritance was some kind of elaborate joke. I sat there in my simple black dress, watching my brother bask in their approval while they dismissed everything I had worked for over the past decade. My name is Anna Wells, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 10 years, I've been the backbone of our family's construction company, Timbermere Brewing, in Portland, Oregon. While Sebastian partied his way through college and then spent his 20s traveling the world on Daddy's dime, I was pulling 80-hour weeks, managing contracts, dealing with suppliers, and making sure our workers got paid on time. But apparently, none of that mattered to anyone sitting in this mahogany-paneled office. Anna always was Daddy's little princess with her dollhouse collection, my Aunt Patricia chimed in, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that hadn't seen a single tear. At least Sebastian understands business. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Sebastian understanding business? The man who had never set foot on a construction site, who couldn't tell a 2x4 from a steel beam, who thought profit margins were something you wrote in the edges of a notebook. But I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded in my lap, because I had learned long ago that defending myself to this family was like trying to reason with a pack of wolves. "Well," Sebastian continued, straightening his expensive tie, "I suppose Anna can keep playing with her toys while I handle the real responsibilities. Father always said the business needed strong leadership." The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat softly. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who had known our family for decades. Something in his expression made me sit up straighter, a flicker of anticipation dancing in my chest. "Actually," Mr. Harrison said, his voice cutting through their laughter like a knife through butter, "the company was never in his name." The room fell silent so quickly that I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. Sebastian's face went from triumphant to confused in the span of a heartbeat, and I felt something warm and dangerous spreading through my chest. After years of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated like the family disappointment, something told me that the tables were about to turn in a way that none of them could possibly imagine. Growing up as the youngest child in the Wells family meant learning early that my opinions didn't matter much. My father, Thomas Wells, was a bear of a man who had built his construction company from nothing, starting with a single truck and a handful of tools. My mother, Caroline, had passed away when I was 12, leaving me to navigate the testosterone-heavy world of construction sites and business meetings without much guidance. Sebastian, being 5 years older and the golden boy, was always destined for greatness in everyone's eyes. He played football in high school, dated the homecoming queen, and sailed through business school with average grades that everyone pretended were excellent. Meanwhile, I spent my teenage years at construction sites, learning the difference between various types of concrete and understanding why foundation work mattered more than flashy finishes. "Anna's got a good head for numbers," my father used to tell people, as if mathematical ability was some cute party trick rather than a valuable business skill. "She keeps me organized." But it was more than that, and deep down, I think he knew it. When Sebastian graduated college and announced he wanted to find himself through a year-long backpacking trip through Europe, I was the one who stepped up. When our biggest client threatened to cancel $1 million contract because of communication breakdowns, I was the one who salvaged the relationship. When we nearly lost 3 key employees to a competitor, I restructured our benefits package and convinced them to stay. I had learned to read architectural blueprints, understand zoning laws, and negotiate with union representatives. I could walk onto any of our job sites and spot safety violations, quality issues, or scheduling problems within minutes. Sebastian, on the other hand, had visited exactly 2 construction sites in his entire life, and both times he had complained about getting his shoes dirty. "Sebastian will take over when I retire," my father would say at family gatherings, and everyone would nod approvingly. "He's got the Wells leadership gene." What they saw as leadership, I recognized as laziness disguised by charm. Sebastian could schmooze clients at fancy dinners, but he couldn't read a contract to save his life. He looked good in a suit and sounded confident when he talked about synergy and market positioning, but he had no idea what it actually cost to pour a foundation or frame a house. Still, I kept working. I kept solving problems, managing crises, and building relationships with our suppliers and subcontractors. I told myself that someday my contributions would be recognized, that the family would see how much I had sacrificed for the business we all claimed to love. Looking back now, sitting in that lawyer's office with everyone staring at Mr. Harrison in stunned silence, I realized that my father had seen it all along. The question was whether he had done something about it. The night my father died, 3 months before this moment in the lawyer's office, I was the one holding his hand in the hospital room. Sebastian was in Miami at some conference that was probably more vacation than business, and by the time he flew back, the funeral arrangements were already made. "You've been my right hand all these years," my father had whispered during one of his lucid moments in those final days. "You understand this business better than anyone." I had squeezed his hand and told him not to worry about work, that everything would be fine. But there was something in his eyes, a weight that seemed like he wanted to say more. He kept looking toward his briefcase in the corner of the room, the one that never left his side during business hours. "Anna," he had said, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him. "The dolls, your grandmother's collection, it's not just about sentiment." At the time, I thought he was talking about the emotional value of the antiques. My grandmother's doll collection had been passed down through generations, and while I had always found them slightly creepy, I understood their historical significance. They were beautiful pieces, some dating back to the 1800s, crafted by artisans whose work was increasingly rare. But now, watching Mr. Harrison shuffle through his papers with deliberate precision, I began to wonder if there had been layers to my father's words that I hadn't understood. "The business ownership," Sebastian demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "What do you mean it was never in his name?" Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and pulled out a thick folder. "Your father transferred ownership of Timbermere Brewing to Anna 5 years ago. She has been the legal owner of the company since then, though the transition was kept confidential at Mr. Wells's request." The air in the room seemed to thicken. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. 5 years ago was when Sebastian had decided to spend 6 months in Thailand, exploring his spiritual side, while I was managing the largest contract in our company's history. "That's impossible," Sebastian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm his son. I'm supposed to inherit the business. The will you're inheriting today pertains to Mr. Wells's personal assets," Mr. Harrison continued calmly. "The house, his personal investments, and various family heirlooms. The business has belonged to Anna since 2019. I finally allowed myself to smile, just a little. Around me, I could see the family exchanging confused glances, their earlier celebration curdling into uncertainty. Sebastian's face had gone pale, and for the first time in my adult life, he was looking at me with something that might have been respect. Or maybe it was fear. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Sebastian said, his voice rising with desperation. "Anna doesn't know anything about running a company. She's just the bookkeeper." The words hit me like a physical blow, but instead of anger, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. After 10 years of being dismissed as just the bookkeeper, the moment of truth had finally arrived. I watched Sebastian's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and growing panic as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "I assure you there's no mistake," Mr. Harrison said, pulling out a legal document thick enough to use as a doorstop. "Miss Wells has been the sole owner and operator of Timbermere Brewing since September 15th, 2019. Your father made this transfer to protect the business from potential creditors and to ensure continuity of operations under experienced management." Experienced management. The words tasted sweet in my mouth even though I hadn't spoken them. I had spent years listening to Sebastian talk over me in meetings, watching him take credit for projects I had managed from start to finish, and enduring his condescending explanations of business concepts I had mastered before he learned to balance a checkbook. "But I went to business school," Sebastian protested, as if his degree trumped my decade of actual experience. "I have an MBA from Portland State, with a 2.8 GPA, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Mr. Harrison had dropped his bombshell. "In a program you took 5 years to complete because you kept taking semesters off to find yourself." The family turned to stare at me, as if I had suddenly sprouted wings. Aunt Patricia's mouth fell open, and my cousin Jake actually dropped his coffee cup. It clattered against the hardwood floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. "Anna," my stepmother Diane said sharply, "that's no way to talk to your brother." "You're right," I replied, standing up from my chair for the first time since we had entered the office. "I should probably use his proper title. Sebastian, as the owner of Timbermere Brewing, I want to formally thank you for your years of minimal contribution to our company's success." I could see Sebastian's hands shaking as he processed what I was saying. The golden boy who had always been handed everything was finally facing a reality where his charm and connections couldn't save him. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Father would never. He knew I was going to take over. We talked about it all the time." "You talked about it," I corrected. He listened. "There's a difference." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps I should explain the full scope of the business transfer. Miss Wells, your father was very thorough in his documentation. Would you like me to continue reading the details?" I nodded, settling back into my chair. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Around me, the family sat in stunned silence, their earlier celebration forgotten as they struggled to understand how completely they had misread the situation. The transfer included all business assets, contracts, equipment, and intellectual property, Mr. Harrison continued. Miss Wells also assumed all business debts and obligations, which she has been managing successfully for the past 5 years. The company's value has increased by approximately 40% under her leadership. Sebastian made a choking sound. I glanced at him and saw that his face had gone from pale to green around the edges. 40% growth wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the result of careful planning, strategic investments, and countless 18-hour days that he had never bothered to acknowledge. "Now," Mr. Harrison said, "shall we continue with the personal estate distribution?" The personal estate reading felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Sebastian inherited the family house, which sounded impressive until Mr. Harrison mentioned the outstanding mortgage balance of $300,000. He also received my father's personal investments, which had been severely depleted over the past few years to cover Sebastian's various business ventures and extended vacations. "The antique doll collection," Mr. Harrison announced, "goes to Anna, along with all associated documentation and appraisals." Sebastian actually laughed, though it sounded more like a bark than an expression of humor. "See? I told you she gets the dolls. At least some things make sense." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was practically vibrating with anticipation. My father's comment about the dolls not being just about sentiment was starting to make perfect sense. During his final days, he had mentioned something about documentation and appraisals, words that had seemed insignificant at the time. "Mr. Harrison," I said carefully, "could you elaborate on the appraisals?" The elderly lawyer smiled, and I caught a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Certainly. Your grandmother's collection consists of 47 pieces, including several rare Jumeau dolls from the 1870s and a complete set of early Madame Alexander collectibles. The most recent appraisal, completed last year, valued the collection at $512,000. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear someone's stomach growling. Sebastian's laughter died in his throat, and he stared at me with the expression of someone who had just realized he had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. $500,000, Aunt Patricia whispered. For dolls? Antique dolls are serious investments, Mr. Harrison explained. Miss Wells's great-grandmother began the collection in the 1920s, and each subsequent generation has added carefully selected pieces. Your father was quite proud of Anna's knowledge of the collection's history and value. I had always been the family member who listened to my grandmother's stories about each doll, who helped her research their origins and maintain their condition. While Sebastian had been rolling his eyes and making jokes about creepy old toys, I had been learning about craftsmanship, historical significance, and market appreciation. So let me understand this, Sebastian said slowly, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Anna gets a business worth millions plus $500,000 in antiques, and I get a house with a massive mortgage? You also get father's car, Diane offered weakly, as if a 10-year-old pickup truck might somehow balance the scales. The Timbermere Brewing Company, Mr. Harrison added, consulting his notes, was appraised at $2.3 million as of last month. Miss Wells has been managing the company's finances, operations, and strategic planning for the past 5 years, while maintaining her position as majority owner. I watched Sebastian do the math in his head, his face cycling through various shades of realization and defeat. $2.3 million for the business, plus $500,000 for the dolls, plus the satisfaction of finally being recognized for my actual contributions. Meanwhile, he was looking at a house he couldn't afford to maintain, and a pickup truck that needed a new transmission. This can't be legal, he said desperately. There has to be something we can do. Anna tricked him somehow. Actually, I said, standing up again and smoothing down my skirt. I think it's time I explained exactly how this happened. 5 years ago, I began, enjoying the way everyone leaned forward despite themselves. Sebastian was in Thailand finding his spiritual center while I was managing the Patterson Heights development project. You remember that one, don't you, Sebastian? The $20 million contract that almost fell through because of permitting issues? Sebastian's eyes darted around the room, looking for support that wasn't coming. Everyone remembered the Patterson Heights project because it had been the biggest success story in our company's history. I spent 3 months working with city planners, environmental consultants, and zoning committees to resolve problems that could have cost us everything, I continued. While I was doing that, our lawyer discovered that one of our subcontractors was preparing to file a lawsuit that could have bankrupted us. Mr. Harrison nodded. Your father was facing potential personal liability that could have extended to his personal assets, including the family home. So he called me into his office, I said, remembering that conversation as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. He said he had been watching me handle increasingly complex responsibilities, and he wanted to protect both the business and the family. The solution was to transfer ownership to someone who actually understood the company's operations. But why didn't he tell us? Diane asked, though her voice lacked its earlier accusatory tone. Because he knew exactly how you would react, I replied. The same way you're reacting now, with shock that Anna could possibly be capable of running something more complicated than a lemonade stand. Sebastian finally found his voice again. This is insane. You can't just give away a multi-million-dollar company without discussing it with the family. He didn't give it away, I said. And for the first time, I allowed some steel to creep into my voice. I earned it. Every 18-hour day, every crisis I solved, every relationship I built with our clients and suppliers. While you were posting Instagram photos from beach resorts, I was making sure our workers had jobs to come back to. I pulled out my own folder, one I had brought with me but hadn't expected to need. I have 5 years of financial records showing company growth under my management. I have testimonials from clients, suppliers, and employees. I have documentation of every major decision I've made and every problem I've solved. Mr. Harrison looked impressed. Your father mentioned you were thorough, but I didn't realize you had compiled such comprehensive records. I learned early that in this family, you need to document everything if you want anyone to believe you actually did it, I said, glancing meaningfully at Sebastian. Too many times I watched someone else take credit for my work. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. instead of the shocked silence of people processing unexpected news. This was the uncomfortable quiet of people realizing they had been wrong about something fundamental. "So what happens now?" Sebastian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at my brother. This man who had spent 37 years coasting on charm and family connections, who had never questioned his right to inherit everything our father had built. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. "Now," I said, "you figure out how to make your own way in the world, just like I did." I gathered my papers and stood up, ready to leave the office where I had just officially become one of the wealthiest young women in Portland. But before I reached the door, I turned back one more time. "Oh, and Sebastian, the business isn't hiring right now." The aftermath of the will reading was everything I had dreamed of and more. Sebastian stumbled out of Mr. Harrison's office looking like he had been hit by a freight train, while Aunt Patricia and Diane whispered furiously in the hallway about unfair surprises and ungrateful children. I walked past them all with my head held high, carrying the folder that contained 5 years of documentation, proving I had earned every penny of my inheritance. "Anna, wait!" Sebastian called after me as I reached the elevator. His voice had lost all its earlier arrogance, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. "We need to talk about this." I turned to face him, noting how his expensive suit suddenly looked shabby and his perfect hair appeared disheveled. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Sebastian? How you never once asked about my work? How you assumed you deserved to inherit a business you never bothered to understand? Or how you just spent the last hour insulting my intelligence in front of our entire family?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, apparently realizing that any answer he gave would only make things worse for him. "You know what the funny thing is?" I continued, stepping into the elevator. "I actually would have been willing to work with you. If you had ever shown even a tiny bit of respect for what I do, or taken 5 minutes to learn about the business, we could have been partners. But you were too busy being handed everything to notice that someone else was doing all the work." The elevator doors started to close, and Sebastian made a half-hearted attempt to follow me, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said firmly. "You made your choice a long time ago. You chose to treat me like I was invisible, like my contributions didn't matter. Now you get to live with the consequences." As the elevator descended, I caught a glimpse of Sebastian's reflection in the polished doors. He was standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by family members who were looking at him with the same mixture of disappointment and pity they had once reserved for me. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my newly redecorated office at Timbermere Brewing headquarters, reviewing expansion plans that would have been impossible under Sebastian's expected leadership. The owner and chief executive officer nameplate on my desk still gave me a little thrill every time I saw it. My assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Wells? There's a Sebastian Wells here to see you. He says he's your brother." I looked up from the architectural blueprints spread across my conference table. Through my office window, I could see our newest construction site, where we were building a sustainable housing development that would be featured in next month's Portland Business Journal. The project was my design, my vision, and my responsibility. "Send him in," I said. Sebastian entered my office looking like a man who hadn't slept well in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was uncombed, and he had the defeated posture of someone who had finally run out of options. "Nice office," he said, though his voice lacked any real appreciation. "I heard you're expanding into green construction." "We are," I replied, not bothering to stand up or offer him a chair. "It's a growing market, and we're positioned to be regional leaders in sustainable building practices." He nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the awards on my walls, the photos of completed projects, and the architectural certificates I had earned while he was busy traveling the world. "Anna," he said finally, "I need a job." The words hung in the air between us, and I realized that this was the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for. Sebastian Wells, the golden boy who had never worked a day in his life, was asking his little sister for employment. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, "but we're not hiring. Sebastian's life unraveled quickly after the will reading, as word spread through Portland's business community about the dramatic reversal of fortune at Timbermere Brewing. His reputation as a future business leader crumbled when people learned he had expected to inherit a company that his sister had actually been running for years, while his lack of real experience became painfully obvious when he tried to find employment in construction or development firms that knew the Wells family history. The family house became a financial burden he couldn't manage, forcing him to take a job as a sales associate at a car dealership while struggling to make mortgage payments on a property he couldn't afford to maintain. Within 6 months, Sebastian had to move into a small apartment and watch from a distance as his sister expanded the business he had taken for granted, knowing that his years of dismissing her contributions had cost him everything he had expected to inherit. As I signed the contract for our 4th major expansion project, I reflected on how Sebastian's years of mockery had inadvertently prepared me for this moment. His constant dismissal of my abilities had forced me to document every success, prove every point, and build the kind of comprehensive track record that made my ownership unquestionable when the truth finally emerged, teaching me that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people discover that the person they underestimated was actually in control all along.